evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I'm the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's Civil and Human Rights Education and Enforcement Agency. Joining me as co-host in just a few minutes will be Jose Villegas, our Executive Director, also from the Office of Human Rights. And it is our pleasure tonight to welcome all of you to another in our U.S. Constitution and You series, this time focusing on the first three articles. We are joined again by our two special guests, our office's long-term collaborators and brilliant legal minds, Renée Battle-Brooks and Gabriel Christian. It is really, truly an honor to have both of these scholars and civil rights activists with us again tonight. Throughout the evening, I'm going to be sharing some links in the chat feature to our previous program we had with them on the Constitution, as well as ways to get more information about some of the things that they will be discussing tonight. So check that live chat feature. If you're watching on demand later, you can click that option as you're watching to see what's put in there. And for those watching live, we also invite you to share questions in the chat feature, and we will share them with our guests as our time allows. We are so glad that you've chosen to be with us. So welcome, Renée and Gabriel. It's awesome to have you back.
Thank you. So we're doing the first three articles or the first three amendments? It's a little late to ask the teacher.
It is so great. So I think we're doing the first three articles. What do you think we're doing?
Yeah.
Did I say amendments?
The first three amendments, but that's okay. Gabriel, what do you think we're doing?
The first three amendments.
First three amendments. Oh, so the mistake is mine. Okay, change of plans, everybody.
Well, that's
first
okay.
Three amendments. Let's do it. Okay. Kyla hastily writes some new questions down. Okay, so I'm so glad we found this out now that we're on the air. So first three amendments, let's do it. But before we jump into this, could each of you just take a few minutes and describe and just tell people who you are, a little bit about you?
Gabriel, please, you go first.
No, ladies first.
I'm too busy laughing.
I'm old school.
It's actually pretty funny.
Thank you. So my name is Renée Battle-Brooks. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of knowing Gabriel Christian and Kyla Hannington for quite a few years now. I started out my legal career as a public defender. I defended those that were indigent for about 8 years, both in Baltimore County, which is everything outside of Baltimore City, and then 4 years in Prince George's County, whereupon I then switched sides and I became a prosecutor for 19 years. And then I had the privilege of serving as the executive director of the Office of Human Rights the following 6 years, an amazing group of people and warriors for justice. And then I'm currently, and I have the privilege of serving in an amazing organization. It's WMATA, Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, but I work very particularly for their Metro Transit Police Department. I serve as their criminal law manager. I'm thrilled to do that. I wear several hats, but one of my primary hats is actually teaching in our Criminal Justice Academy, new recruits, Virginia law, Maryland law, DC law. And Kyla has given me the privilege of just making a pitch. For anybody listening, we are recruiting. If you want to be a civil rights warrior through being a police officer, because you defend the Constitution, that's what police officers take an oath, we are actively recruiting. The requirements are you have to be a citizen of the United States. You have to be at least 20 years and 6 months old. So just before you turn 21. A valid driver's license, high school diploma, or a GED. No college is required. We have amazing benefits, signing bonuses. It's an amazing organization. Here's the thing. There's no age limit. So we have recruits in our class that are considerably older than 21. And it's a great place. It's a great career. So if you have interest and you want just a little bit more information, please reach out to me and I will put you in contact with those that can help. But it is an amazing opportunity. We are the only police department in the entire United States that serves 3 concurrent jurisdictions. Those are the District of Columbia, the state of Maryland, and the Commonwealth of Virginia. So it's a dynamic profession. Thank you. Please join us. Thank you, Kyla Huntington.
Thank you. Gabriel?
Yes, thank you very much, Carla. That is an outstanding presentation by my dear friend. I first met Renée Battle-Brooks. I'm not sure whether she was a state's attorney, it may have been a PD, but she was the first lawyer I met who played the violin. And that impressed me because I come from a musical family, and my father played the mandolin, his brothers played the violin. And I was trying to lean on her to teach my daughter the violin, but that didn't happen. Anyway, my name is Gabriel Christian. It's a high honor and privilege to be here again with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. We've been honored to serve under the former director, Renée Battle-Brooks, and with the able assistance of Kyla Harrington and the other members of her team. I attended school here in the district at the University of DC College of Business and Public Management, and then later at the Georgetown University Law Center. Came to the county in 1988 as a clerk and never left. And my best class, interestingly, by Professor Charles or Chuck Abernathy, graduate of Harvard University Law School, was constitutional law. And I didn't tell you that the last time, but he had me tutor a student who was an Emmy Award winner in the second semester. So constitutional law was a small section in the first semester. I remember a lot of discussion about the War Powers Act. That is that the War Powers Act gave the right to declare war to the Congress and not to the president, because they thought that it was such a weighty decision. It should not be left to one person because that could be misused and abused. And so let's go to the tribune or tribunal of the people, that is the Congress. Of course, unfortunately, that has not been followed because, as I said in an essay, the U.S. Constitution is nothing but parchment. It only comes to life where there exists a nation with the requisite rule of law ethic to ensure that they can breathe the life into what could otherwise be sterile parchment. And so we are happy to be here this evening to discuss the first three amendments of the Bill of Rights, the first, second, and third, and to give maybe a little bit of background on how the Constitution came to be. Thank you.
It's so great to have you both here. And I just want to say for people tuning in, like, our guests had other commitments tonight, and they made the decision to go ahead with this program because it was so important, and they value the opportunity to talk about this so much. And so I just want to highlight that for a moment to kind of impress upon viewers also of first of all, your generosity with your time, but also the importance of this discussion. So thank you both for making the time. And so, Gabriel, just to maybe if you could go into a little bit, you said just as you were closing, you said that one of the things that we could also talk about is a little bit about how the Constitution came to be. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple minutes, because that was actually one of the questions I had is, is this based on British common law? Like, where does this kind of come from? And so could you take a few minutes and talk about that?
So if you remember from our early civics book or early history books, you hear about the Boston Tea Party, when folks in Boston threw bales of tea into the Boston Harbor because they felt they were being improperly taxed. And of course, we hear the cry of no taxation without representation, that the 13 colonies were being ruled from Britain. They were colonies of the United Kingdom. And the colonies, the folks who were in the colonial settlements like in Massachusetts, Virginia, did not feel that their voices could be heard in London. Okay, and so that's where the Declaration of Independence, essentially drawn up by Thomas Jefferson, which begins with the lofty phraseology that we all are familiar with, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. That is 1776. And the leader of the revolution is one George Washington of Virginia, whose only trip outside the United States was to my neck of the woods where I was born, on Dominica. But no, he went to Barbados because Barbados was the most easternmost island in the Caribbean, and the United States was settled primarily from the Caribbean, not Plymouth Rock. In fact, a lot of the early finance capital came from the sugar trade from the Caribbean islands, the English islands. And that's one of the reasons why the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, was from just north of me, Nevis, because the commerce and the trade and the insurance, the financial matrix was really rooted in the Atlantic slave trade and the sugar industry, because the sugar industry was the industry. It was the wealthiest industry ever in human history up to that point in time. So 1776, Declaration of Independence, the war is fought and Britain loses the war. And on about September 3rd, 1783, the United States, or the Continental Army, wins and Britain departs. Essentially at that time, the first thing that happened was you had in the different states, you had the local, in Virginia, it was called the House of Burgesses. You had the local, what you call councils, but they really did not have any cohesive nation. It was all different states. So the first thing you had after the war was won, the Confederation started in 1781, but from 1781 to 1789, you had the Articles of Confederation. Really, it was a very weak, diffused sort of government. There is no power to tax. And of course, if you're a government and you don't have a bank account, you're not much of a government, because how are you going to pay for roads? How are you going to pay for a navy? How are you going to pay for an army? How are you going to pay for a postal service? There was no strong executive authority as in a president. There's no national court system, right? And states were really beginning to act like independent countries. And there was a great concern that with a weak central government, the whole process of U.S. independence as a body politic, as one national entity. And then that moved things further along when there was rebellion. Remember, the tax power was something that the British had imposed that the colonists had resented. So when there was an effort to tax farmers in Pennsylvania, they rebelled. There was a rebellion. It was the Shays' Rebellion. And guess who was leading the charge to put that down? No less a person than George Washington. And he didn't really like it that he had to be fighting his own people, but they did put it down. And so people in Washington and James Madison began to say, well, we need a different dispensation. We need a strong national government. We need a national court system to adjudicate disputes. And we need an executive to implement whatever the legislative power decided. So in 1787, there was a constitutional convention, and that is where the delegates met at Independence Hall in a place called Philadelphia that none of you have heard about. You've heard about it. James Madison from Virginia was the architect of that. George Washington, the general in charge of the victorious Independence Army, presided over that. And Benjamin Franklin, the inventor and the philosopher king, he was the diplomat bringing people together. And it was at that time that they decided on the Bill of Rights. There was a tug and pull between the Federalists, who wanted a strong central government, and the anti-Federalists, who feared that a strong central government reminded them of the British, that it would be tyrannical. But the Federalists eventually won out. But to win, they had to persuade the anti-Federalists that, look, while we want a strong federal government with the balance of powers, that is the executive branch, that is the presidency, a judicial branch, that is the court system, and the legislative branch, that is the Congress, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a Bill of Rights. And that Bill of Rights will protect the rights of American citizens in a way that reflected the concerns that led to the revolution. So what were those concerns? You didn't have the right to just insult the king or criticize the king, so you want to have freedom of speech. You didn't want to have to live in a society where the Church of England exercised hegemony over all other churches, so you want to have freedom of religion. You didn't want to have a constitutional society where people couldn't freely assemble to protest. So you want to have freedom of assembly. And you wanted to have a mechanism by which the citizens could petition their government. And so you have the right to petition. So by putting those rights together in one first article, or First Amendment, if you can say, you then saw that compromise with the folks who won, that is, those who wanted a strong federal government, but they're putting in almost guardrails, if I can use that terminology, guardrails to protect the rights that had just been won in the Revolutionary War, that we wouldn't go back to that. And of course, there was a concern. What if the government put those rights together for all of us to enjoy? Some would argue that's where the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, comes from. I have a bit of a disagreement with that. I do believe that that came about because there was a belief that we should not have a standing army, that this was a country of free men. Of course, they didn't talk much of free women in those days. Women were property. Women couldn't contract. Women couldn't vote. But with the militia, everybody being armed, someone would call the militia together to defend the status quo whenever the need arose. And so that's where you have the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Right? There are those of us who say that that has outlived its usefulness because the United States now has a national army. Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. The United States also has a system of state National Guards, standing National Guard armories with tanks and all kinds of impedimenta of war. So why should you have the right to bear arms? That was back in the old days of Paul Revere. Anybody remembers Paul Revere and the famous ride? The English, or is it the British? The British are coming.
The British are coming.
So so that is the history. You have, as I said, colonial state. Folks feel they're not being given their due regard in way of being able to have their voices heard. They're not listened to. They don't have the right to assemble. They don't have the right to speech. They don't have the right to be free of reasonable taxation. There's a revolt in 1776. Revolution is won in 1783. You have the Confederation between 1781 and 87, but it's weak. And then you have the Articles of Confederation being superseded by the Constitution after the Constitutional Congress of 1791, when the Bill of Rights and all of that comes into being.
Wow. That was an amazing overview. So go ahead, Renee.
If I could just add, the one thing that struck me that I guess I hadn't fully realized was that, yes, just as Gabriel said, we were operating under these articles for quite a few years without this central government. And there was this real sense that maybe after we declared our independence, fought the Revolutionary War for all of those years, won, that maybe we might indeed collapse because we couldn't seem to centralize ourselves. What I hadn't realized was that the only way, just as Gabriel said, there was this strong opposition within the 13 colonies to have this constitution ratified because they were so fearful of this type of centralized government that may have mirrored the British rule. And that the only way our Constitution got across the finish line was James Madison's first 10 amendments, called the Bill of Rights, that said, okay, look, you're worried about this, but we're going to write these 10 amendments that absolutely solidify our individual rights and the things that we're that are guaranteed. So that's the part that I actually hadn't fully realized, and that the Constitution was drafted actually in 1783. So 1783 to 1791, there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes, which kind of tells me that, good things sometimes take a minute to get right. Mm-hmm. It was just sort of interesting for me to revisit that and understand this didn't all happened in 1776. 1776 to 1791 is quite a journey.
Thank you.
So part of that was warfare. And
Yeah.
then, of course, what I call the teething pains, small baby. Of course,
Yeah.
when the teething period comes on, there's a lot of pain. And you got to rub those gums, because they flap those gums and so on.
That's right.
So those are the fangs of the New Republic. And
That's right.
the
But
Bill
this-
of Rights really was one way of, I guess, addressing concerns that strong federal government would be tyrannical, like the British had been, and giving folks the ability to petition when they believe their rights were being threatened. And of course, the judiciary, that is the federal court system, both at the state and federal level, Supreme Court level.
Yeah.
Get that.
The other thing, if we're moving on sort of to the First Amendment, which is interesting, is that under the British rule, there was this thing called, it was a type of sedition that if you wrote something against the king or the government, it was seditious. But if it was truthful, it was even worse, because a tyrannical government doesn't want people to know the truth. So it just really highlights that those roots that we have in all of our amendments, but those first 10, that the First Amendment gave us five things. Just as Gabriel said, the freedom of religion, speech, press, a free press is critical. To petition redress against the government, to, all of these things. What I hadn't also realized, and Gabriel talked about it, that it wasn't just the Church of England. Like, each of the colonies had different religions that they were pressing for, and they were taxing. Like, you were taxed whether you believed or not. You had to support. So, just kind of interesting, our journey. And once everybody agreed to ratify in 1791, we're off and running, not without some challenges, but pretty immediately they said, after the First Amendment was passed, that there were some challenges because somebody did, let's see, what paper was it? Do you remember? Printed something. I'm going to look real fast. Printed something in the papers and was taken to court. And that's when we started with the notion that truth is a defense.
Yes.
Right? The truth is a defense to something that, if you're saying, this is defamation or, slanderous libel. So
That's right.
yeah.
Let me add something to that, which Sister Renée said. And that is something that bears sort of considering not only for the United States, but for all countries. So government is instituted among mankind and humankind, let's say in general, to sort of tame the often barbaric instincts of man, right? So that's where the whole principle of due process, right? Somebody owes me some money. I can go over to his house and burn it while they're sleeping, knock him over the head with a cudgel, take a machete, shoot him with a gun. Well, that would really be barbarism. There would be no order. So we have due process. You've got a complaint, you go to the police. Police will investigate, you'll have your day in court. An impartial jurist will listen, you may have a jury trial, it's district court bench only trial, right? All of that sort of militates against instinct, violence, whimsy, destructive inclinations. So in the old British system that they were escaping, there were things that they took, despite the fact that the American Revolution was an uprising against British colonialism. They had the wisdom to retain some facets of the British tradition. Mm-hmm. One of the facets that's under attack right now was the idea of the Magna Carta, that principle that says that no man or woman is above the law.
Mhm.
We are all equal before the law. In the days of kings, the king was above the law. And that's why there are marches now called No Kings.
Mhm.
Because the principle of the Magna Carta was that ultimately Parliament in Britain tamed the excesses of the monarchy to the point where Britain became a constitutional monarchy. The monarchy is there. The king is given a speech to read. He reads it. He has medals on his chest and braid on his shoulder, but he's really a figurehead. The Parliament makes the law, and the courts interpret law, and the ruling party in Parliament, the executive, executes the law. The king is in his castle, unlike in the old days when he was in his castle and he also controlled the government structure. So the Magna Carta was a principle that made its way into law of the new American Republic. Another element that made its way into the laws of the new American Republic and the Constitution, the first article, is the right of petition, that citizens who oppose arbitrary imprisonment or taxation have the right to petition their elected representatives. You have a right to call your congressman. You have a right to have a meeting and chastise him or her and tell him or her that you're here to do my bidding or the bidding of the community, not some rich lobbyist, not a foreign country that might have undue influence on you. I elected you. My vote is the currency that you use for the power you retain. And I have a right to petition you to make sure that you are respecting those who elected you. And finally, there was an English Bill of Rights that protected free speech in Parliament and other things like that. So when Britain was taken out as the colonial power, it was not done in a way that was whimsical or in entirety. There are enormous aspects of that judicial culture, of that rule of law culture that was retained by the Republic. And those elements found themselves within the first 10 amendments that we call the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, and I actually did some reading on it's a website called Legal Clarity Team, and it really talks about the philosophical roots of the First Amendment and basically the first couple of clauses, the 5, but the first, and it just talked about the principle that governed the authority comes from the consent of the people, just as Gabriel said, and I'm going to read verbatim. If the people are the ultimate source of power, which we are in our form of government, we just have ceded that power to others because we have chosen not to participate, many of us, in our system to vote, to talk to our electeds. So let me read this again. It said that if the people are the ultimate source of power, they need the ability to debate public policy, to scrutinize officials and exchange ideas without fear of punishment. A government that silences its citizens can claim their consent, but never truly have it. One other thing, they said that the founders took this seriously. They believed that open debate wasn't just a nice feature of democracy, but structurally necessary. Without bad ideas going unchallenged, corrupt officials go undetected, and the government drifts away from the people it's supposed to serve. So it's critical, and it still is. It still is.
And just to jump in a little bit on that.
Good evening, Jose Villegas.
Hello.
Good evening. Sorry, I was late. But one question I think is, Renée, you mentioned that is in that and what you just read. You know, sometimes, especially in the current climate, people or elected officials claim mandate when they only get like 40-something% of that of people voting, right?
Right.
Total of people voting might be 43%, but they claim and mandate that it's more than the 50%. So that kind of goes with the idea we just mentioned, that people decide not to participate in the process and let other kind of rule, even though they're not the majority.
Yeah. May I just read from my
Excellent point.
little Constitution book?
It's
May
so
I just
tiny.
read the First Amendment? I'm such a nerd, but yes, I have a little pocket Constitution.
It's like a palms. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's from the ABA, the American Bar Association.
See, Gabriel
Okay.
has to get closer to the screen in order to see it.
Well, yes, it's teeny tiny, but it's adorable. Okay, ready? This is the
Yep.
First Amendment, word for word. Let me see. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's the first clause. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. That's 45 words that have such power.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah. 5 clauses that, each one is debated and litigated, and what does this mean and what can I write? 45, I think it's 45 words, that one.
So let me ask a question dealing with the First Amendment you just read, because I think the first clause dealing with the government should not do any law dealing with religion, right?
Yeah.
Now, what are we devaluing what the Constitution is now? Because you hear other states, for example, creating or mandating a particular religion or belief, a certain school. It's like, are we now kind of degrading, and we are accepting that protection, that reduction of protection from the First Amendment?
You raise such a good point. But I mean, I'm personally uncomfortable when I see that, because to me, when I see this, Congress shall make no law respecting that. Okay, so that's not that Congress has made a law, but or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So if I impose my religion by putting the rules of my religion on a wall in a publicly funded, paid for by tax dollars building, school, whatever, what am I saying? They're not passing a law, but it makes me very uncomfortable, because I think it comes I think that, in my opinion, I'm not a justice on the Supreme Court, but I do think that it violates the First Amendment. If it's a public place and my tax dollars are going towards that, then shouldn't there be equal access for everybody to put their religion, their rules, and whatever their precepts on the wall? Shouldn't I have to then, the Buddhist and the agnostic who says, I don't believe, or the who acknowledges that a being exists and that's about it. An atheist that says that's all, baloney. Why can't all of those also have, because that's what they believe? But Gabriel.
That's an outstanding disposition by Sister Renée. The clause is the amendment is very clear, Mr. Villegas. It says, I should repeat it, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So you're free to do what you want in your Pentecostal church, in your mosque, in your synagogue. But if you're going to ask the local city council to use taxpayers' money to put up a nativity scene, you may have a challenge to that, where it's taxpayers' money. Now, if it's been put up there by the local Rotary Club, that might not be an issue. We do have a national Christmas tree, but it has become almost a secular symbol. It's not like a cross.
I mean, it is a secular symbol. Sure.
So it's like, people who are Muslim and people who are Jewish and people who are Rastafarian and people who are nothing, they put gifts, beneath the Christmas tree, just like the Yule log, that is there right next to it, that's burning, so it's cold, as when you go downtown. and you've got the pit with the Yule log and it's burning. So, you don't get much of a challenge there. But you're right. Once the public purse is involved, once the imprimatur, that is the impression of the state, is present, you have to keep it in the middle. We have now tendencies of religious extremism in certain states, primarily in the south of the country. But those cases, when they come up to the Supreme Court, generally are dealt with in way of protecting the First Amendment and preventing any establishment of a state religion. The United States is supposed to be a democracy, not a theocracy.
So we actually have a question on this exact topic here from a viewer who's wondering about this exact part of the Constitution. Is the Constitution's restriction only to Congress? Because can the president pass a law that respects or prohibits religion?
Now, this is a very important question. Remember when I talked about kings to the person asking the question? In the old days, the kings, not the parliament, was behind the laws. And when I talk about the Magna Carta, what was the principle? That no man or woman is above the law. So when the laws are passed by the Congress, there ought not to be any action by the Supreme Court to grant any political leader immunity. That's a fundamental destruction of the principle of the Magna Carta. That is, if I commit a murder, I'm to be arrested and tried before a court of law. Same thing with a member of Congress. Same thing with the President of the United States. And by the way, to the question that was raised, to the questioner who raised the question, no. Under our system, the laws are passed by the Congress. The President is supposed to be, or is charged with, implementing those laws as the head of the executive power, but he cannot pass the law himself. What he can do, and what he has done, is to pass what are called executive orders. But where those executive orders violate any law under the U.S. Constitution, or anything that's a creature of legislation, he must submit. And that's why there's a big fight now over the War Powers Act, because the War Powers Act gave the power to the U.S. Congress to declare war. Very weighty proposition. And the president has chosen not to call it a war. He says it's an excursion, or he says it's a conflict. But then sometimes he lapses, or his members of cabinet they lapse, and they do have it slip out, and they use the word WAR. Last time I checked, the way that is spelled, that's war. And so we are in a constitutional republic where there are often that tug and pull, and where leaders sometimes will jump over the guardrails if the citizens, as Jose Villegas sort of intimated, are sufficiently lobotomized. By that I mean where they have had a portion of their brains cut out and they do not vote. Because really, when you do not vote, it's like you have money to spend, you have a need to get nutrition or to have a beverage, but you choose to throw that money in the pond or down the toilet, and you choose not to use it. Your vote is your currency to ensure that laws are abided by and that leaders comply with your request. And if you don't use that currency to shape public policy, then you actually undermine the integrity of the entire system.
Yeah. And if I can just I'm sorry, Jose, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll make a question after you.
I was going to make just 2 points. Yes, there are 3 co-equal branches, and the legislative branch is the only body that can pass laws. That is sacrosanct. That is how we operate. But as he said, there are always challenges and pulls and tugs, but 3 co-equal. The judiciary is tasked with interpreting the law. So those are your judges, and the court system interprets what the legislators have passed. To Gabriel's point, I loved when we started this series. He pointed to the preamble of the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We the people, which means that we the people are part of the equation, and we the people cannot go to sleep and choose not to participate, because for all of us to form a more perfect union, for all of us to have life, liberty, and prosperity, we the people have to participate. That's what it says. Sorry.
I just want to say that, Sister Renée, thank you for reciting that preamble there, because, it's powerful. Jefferson was a flawed man. We know about Sally Hemings. But in that moment, his pen was like lightning, writing for posterity into the ink that night, that which was illuminatory. It illuminated for the ages certain basic principles, and that recitation by you was spot on. Thank you for doing it.
So I had a question dealing with it. Still go back to the religious part, because I don't know if you recall that the county at some point was involved in a case dealing with the cross that is in the Bladensburg area, that it went all the way
to the Peace Cross.
Yes,
there.
It went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
In which I believe my recollection is the Supreme Court said that was constitutional. Is it that is chipping away a little bit by little
Well, that's an interesting point. That was decided during COVID, if I remember, and I didn't look at that case, but my recollection was that they said the Peace Cross wasn't necessarily a religious symbol, but more a war memorial, and that it wasn't. If I remember, I could be misremembering.
No,
because they've uncovered it now, because it was covered.
Yes, I was just going because of the cross, I was just thinking of whether.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I guess to your point, then, I guess, must we then, in all national cemeteries, take down any headstones that have a cross on it, or have the Star of David on it, or, it's a national cemetery.
True, and that's.
I don't think that's what it said. That the government isn't pushing a religion. It's not.
So let me say this. As recently as 2026, the case is Mahmoud versus Taylor. The court ruled 6-3 that public schools must allow parents to opt their elementary school children out of instruction involving LGBTQ materials if that is in conflict with their religious beliefs. The court held that forcing parents to choose between public education and their religious convictions constitutes an unconstitutional burden. So that basically saying that, look, they have a right, because if their religious beliefs clash with what is being taught in a particular school, they have a right to say, look, I don't want my child to it's not like it's mathematics or chemistry. It is more sort of philosophy. I don't want my child to be exposed to it. But in general, and this is a conservative court, mind you. So that conservative court, while at the same time protecting the right of the parent to be free in their religious practices, it at the same time holds true to the belief that the public school system cannot sort of have what you call religious displays. You can have that at a private school if it's Catholic school, of course.
But didn't recently in Texas, wasn't there a law? They actually, schools, they have put up the 10 Commandments in some of the public schools, and it's been upheld. That's an interesting comment, Renée. The case you're talking about is, let's see here. And I don't know if that was a Supreme Court ruling or state level. I mean, I know that it's gone up. I don't know if it's reached its final.
Just last month. So this is recent, March 2026.
Okay.
A federal court permanently blocked Arkansas law that required the 10 Commandments to be displayed in every public school classroom and library. Yeah. Similar challenges are ongoing in Louisiana and Texas. Yeah. So there is a battle going on, but I believe Arkansas is going to be the prevailing, if we're to follow precedent. If you're in a library, if you're in a public school, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill and all that is part of our criminal law statutes anyway, but it's religious phraseology from the Christian Bible, and whether you agree with it or not, it should not be allowed in the public school. You can go home in the evening and read that.
Okay. So thank you for bringing that. I hadn't tuned into where it was in the system. I just know that they had the local, state level had said yes, and they'd put them up, and then I knew there were challenges. So yeah,
it's going to make it to the top soon.
Yeah. No. So that. Go ahead.
Let me ask, because I know that we're running out of time, and I think
the second and third.
Yes, I know the third might not take a lot of time, because that is like probably was in the Civil War that it was kind of.
Except for I did a little research. Okay. Actually, it has a lot of relevance.
Okay. So, but going to the Second Amendment though, why is there? This is just my perception.
Well, can I read the Second Amendment first for everybody?
Yes.
This is bedtime stories. Ready? Okay, the Second Amendment ratified in 1791 says, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. There's so much debate on the commas and what it means.
Yeah, so now I know that the idea of, especially the first 10 Amendment, and the total amendment is 27, right? So we know, but I feel at times that the courts, you are the two legal experts of this. No, but in terms of because of being attorneys, right? This is a non-attorney talking. The perception for people is that for me, is that certain court or certain people, they high up, the Second Amendment is way more important than any other amendment, even though that is not necessarily, right? What's perception?
Yeah, well, so what I learned in my research, that's sort of the history of the Second Amendment. It's been around again since 1791, but it wasn't a big deal. For like the first 100 years, there was no big deal. There was like this understanding of what it is. Let me see if I can find. And I got this it's called History Cooperative. And it sketches, let's see if I can grab some of the salient, because it's a lot. So what this article suggests is it takes us back to history, to the American Revolution, and we all know that it started in part because of the taxation, right, without representation and all of this. And that what the British did when they were oppressing, part of what they did was to stop the importation of firearms to the New World. That was punishment. So in retaliation, the colonists then began to smuggle guns from the continent, from Europe, stockpiling them because they thought one day they would need it to fight the vindictive crown. So that's sort of the backdrop of how it started. And then the tensions rose until the British, of course, sent the troops to quell the insurrection, only to find an unanticipated organized response. They did not think that was going to happen. This is what they say, beginning in Boston, the revolution was the first of its kind in history, truly a shot heard around the world. So it talks about sort of this backdrop. So then it talks about sort of the establishment of the Bill of Rights and how it came to being, but that the understanding in early days was It's whether this was a collective right of government, or was it an individual right to possess arms? And then it kind of sketched all of these powers, and it wasn't a big deal. But then it does talk, right? Laws are always passed through historical perspective. I mean, you have to know what's happening at the time to understand why the Supreme Court, why the courts rule in a particular way, because they are really talking about very particular issues. And so it takes us through, and I wish I highlighted stuff, but like this case in 1842, State versus, actually 1822 it started, where the Supreme Court of that interpreted the Second Amendment to be an individual right issue. But the Supreme Court then in 1842, so 20 years later, in State versus Buzzard, decided that that Second Amendment was a collective right. That's how they interpret it. So there's this tug of war. Is it they didn't even have this discussion about well established, right? Because what this article talks about is that really the purpose of guns when the amendment was made they weren't even looking at the things that even 100 years later, 20 years later, they were looking at, but that guns were for hunting, and it was a collective, like you lived in small communities, and those guns were for everybody there to protect from other communities robbing you, or right. So it was this whole different way of thinking. So it's not, and it has evolved. And then, when Lincoln was assassinated, then it was interpreted different ways. And then before that, the Civil War had a big implication on how they interpreted that, right? So anyway, Gabriel, please. I'm just trying to.
Let us never forget the 10-ton gorilla or elephant in the room. When this Constitution came into being, the United States was primarily a slave state.
That's exactly.
And the Second Amendment, Brother Jose Villegas, was put in place for two primary reasons: to police a population that was always seeking to rebel for its freedom, and to protect against Native Americans. I remember going to Williamsburg on a tour, and behind the desk of one of the great houses was a shield with 12 swords, 6 swords on each side. And I asked the tour guide, why is that right at the head of the table? He says, well, if while they were having dinner, Indians showed up, every guest at the table could pull a sword and go into battle. So we are talking about a society where almost a third, if not sometimes half, of the population was in chains. And you couldn't wait for the federal government or the state government militia. You wanted to have, because remember in those days, African Americans were not allowed to own weapons. So the militia was there to police a restive and oppressed population. It has remained even where we now have abolished slavery, even where now we've consigned the Native American to the what you call reservation. Just like the 3/5 clause. Remember, in the Constitutional Congress in Philadelphia, there was a debate about the makeup of the Congress. You had so many senators and congressmen based on your population. Guess what? The southern states wanted their enslaved African Americans to be counted as whole human beings. So that way they would have more votes in Congress, more representation in Congress. The northern states that had pretty much by that time abolished slavery said, no, that's not right. That can't be right. You are saying that these people are not human. You're saying they're property. So why do you want now to count them as whole human beings? So Jose Villegas, Kyla Harrington, I am sorry to advise you, this was the compromise that still lives with us within the Constitution. The 3/5 clause. That is, the final compromise was We won't count African Americans as whole people. We'll count them as 3/5 of a person. So they're only 60% human. But of course, Thomas Jefferson could have children with them.
But of course, yeah.
So,
So to answer your question, yeah. So there's this backdrop of slavery, and then anyway, it's very convoluted.
okay, and I know we.
I want to say one more thing. This is where history can be a burden, because we know that the people who go to Sandy Hook, is that Sandy Hook up there in Connecticut?
Yes.
Massacre the children.
Yeah.
Was that a well-regulated militia?
Right.
You don't have to answer me, but I think I know your answer.
So now I know that we're approaching a certain time, but tell us about this Third Amendment that we don't hear that much because of
so
what it is.
Let me first read it. And you're right. It's something that we don't talk about. It's not litigated. Here we go. 1791. No soldier shall in time of peace be quarantined. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. It's not quarantined. It's so small. My tired eyes can't see. Quartered. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So it is true that it doesn't seem relevant, but this article that I found, it is called U.S. Laws. It actually talks about why the Third Amendment is still relevant. And this is why they say there are things that we haven't contemplated. They say that actually the Third Amendment principles are foundational for the protecting the rights of citizens' interests of peace and conflict. So it's something that's foundational, that's woven throughout. But how's it relevant today in 2026? They say that actually when we start talking about the government and surveillance and drones and data collection. I guess he's not talking about this. That with technology and individual rights, that this Third Amendment comes to life, and that there may be ways that you're going to see litigation with these issues. Let's see here. Let me read one other part. The Third Amendment, it continues to affect America because the government's use, as I said, of new surveillance technology that impinges on individual rights, which really this Third Amendment is the backdrop of. They talked about private sector contractors that are hired by the government to provide security out overseas, but there may come a time when the government pays private contractors, private security contractors within the United States. Although they're not soldiers under the law, what does that mean? So we may start seeing things with this Third Amendment. Because some of these other things, like the Second Amendment, was dormant basically for 100 years. There was no litigation, right? So, and then another 50 years after that first litigation, and then, so it's just now coming to prominence because this is an issue now that we are seeing. Another, they talked about that I just said, government surveillance and data mining online, like, tracking what we look at online, our travel patterns, our financial transactions. So all of this comes within the rubric of this Third Amendment because of its foundational principles.
That's an interesting take.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why she's brilliant. I actually had the
thought, she's not. I just researched.
I had the thought earlier that how do we protect freedoms that were sort of considered 250 years ago in a system where we have AI-driven algorithms that can be crafted to intrude into a very intimate space. We are in a surveillance age. Someone was saying that there are companies now that will hack into your TV. So right now I'm on this program, and the camera pops out of the computer, and when I am done with you, I will pop it back in. So it's not permanently available to be switched on and off. So most of the computers now that have been made, they give you the ability to hide the camera.
Right.
And the reason is because of what she's talking about, the sanctity of the home. So in the early days, it was to make sure that soldiers didn't come in and put your dirty boots on your nice linen, and to lie down on your pillow with an unwashed head that had not been washed in months or what have you. That was the old configuration. But in today's world, with the surveillance state, isn't the sanctity of the home no longer a real sanctuary? That's the question. And I think that's what's raised by her comment, and that we may begin to see more litigation on the Third Amendment when the intrusion is no longer a soldier, but maybe a robot, may I say? Mm-hmm. The little drones. Are you aware of the little bird drones?
Yep.
The little insect drones that can come and sit on your windowsill and come inside and do what you're saying? Are you aware of those?
No, I'm really not aware of these.
They exist.
Yeah.
Yes, they exist. You can go on YouTube and you can see them.
Wow.
And so they're not soldiers, but what are they doing? Aren't they invading?
Right. The sanctity of the home, which is sacred to us as Americans because of where we came from under British tyranny.
In this type of discussion, it's really good, because I have not. I read the Third Amendment, and I took it literally. Okay, that soldiers, not necessarily what Renee, Gabriel pointed out. That's an interesting take on it.
Yeah, because
we have more for later.
Because Jose, the broader framework was an invasion of one's personal space, one's privacy, right?
That's the underpinning.
Property, right? Yep. Protecting that. Well, how much control do you have of your personal space? If you are being surveilled all the time, if you're being eavesdropped upon, right?
Yeah.
So I think litigation, I think it needs, I'm happy it's there, because it at least gives us a basis to petition our legislators to strengthen privacy laws and to place penalties on corporations that, will try to mine data. So there's Alexa. Alexa is sitting there, and then you see the blue light starts to spin. Alexa is listening. They say they're not, but who are we to know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
Let me just do a couple of things. We are out of time, but I want to share one comment. We got a lot of comments, but here's one that's just wonderful. Please have more of these conversations. I'm learning so much. I love sharing with my students. This is from Dr. Stewart, who's a faithful viewer with often brings her class to these. This has really been great, and I feel like we even only looking at 3 things, we still barely scratched it. I mean, it was just, there's so much to talk about. I really appreciate you both being here. So you'll be hearing from me, of course, to find out when we can have you back. That's going to work for all of us. But this conversation is so important to talk about the Constitution and its amendments and its impact on civil life here, and things for us to think about. I really appreciate you reminding us of the importance of voting, of engagement, of the amendment, like engage with your elected officials. I mean, how many of us are like, oh, they're not going to listen to us? Well, it's like, what was the thing that your vote is your currency, and to use that and to put that pressure. So thank you so much for just all of that conversation. For everybody watching, whether you are watching live or on demand later, thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. We hope to see you at some of our other events. You can learn all that we do by visiting our webpage at civilrights.mypgc.us. And we just really want to leave you with some encouragement. We've put, and also in the live viewing chat, there's a link to our previous program if you'd like to go back and watch that. And keep an eye on our website, as we will schedule a third in this series as soon as we can, and sort of keep working our way through the Constitution with these 2 wonderful guests, Renee and Gabriel. Again, thank you so much, Renee and Gabriel, for being with us. It's always an incredible pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless you.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Right.